Hello and welcome to Food Safety Fridays. My name is Simon Timperley from the International Food Safety and Quality Network. Our special guest today is Joy Laing from DNV, and the subject today is what matters to consumers when buying food and beverage products. But before we get into that, how are you doing, Joy? Nice to have you along today. First time with Food Safety Fridays, but I've known you for how long have we sort of known each other, roughly?
Too long, at least 25 years.
25 years. And literally, I didn't know, but I live in a place called Ramsbottom, and Joy lives just down the road, don't you? Where do you live?
Not too far on the Wirral, although we do have slightly different accents, I think.
Yes, and different football or soccer affiliations. I'm a Manchester United, and Joy's an Evertonian. Right, so about professionally though, Joy, do you want to give a little intro to you before we play the ads?
Yeah, sure. So like Simon said, my name is Joy Laing. I've worked in the certification and food safety certification industry, as Simon mentioned, for quite a number of years. Previously with companies BSI and Bureau Veritas. And most recently, I joined DNV to join and head up the global food safety team in, just before lockdown last year. So thank you for inviting me today.
Great. Thanks, Joy. Right. I'm going to play the video ads in a sec. Just everybody type in the sidebar. Tell us where you're joining us from today. It's nice to see it. I mean, you can see there, Joy, Libya, USA, Malawi, Saudi Arabia, Philippines, all over the world. So you're all welcome. I'll play the video ads and then we'll be back for the presentation shortly.
The world of food has changed a lot in the last 100 years. But one thing that doesn't change? Ensuring the quality and safe handling of food. No matter what changes are yet to come, we're proud to always be on our clients' side, shaping the future of food, today and tomorrow. AIB International, ever onward.
Oops. Missed that. Okay, ready for the presentation now. I'll be back for the Q&A afterwards, so hand you over to Joy, and there we go.
Great, thank you, Simon. So this survey is done under Viewpoint. We call it our Viewpoint survey, and it focuses on what matters to consumers when buying products. If we take a look, we did this survey in 2020. There was a certain number of countries involved this time. When the next survey is done, it will be a different selection of countries. So there was over 4,500 respondents, and the geographies covered in the survey was North America, South America, Europe, and Asia. And we took the different age groups, and you'll see these age groups quoted further on in the presentation in relation to their generations. And it was around about an equal of 50% of male and female on the demographics of the sample profile that was taken. So the first couple of slides are just a very brief overview. I'll go into more detail on some of the key highlights a little later in the presentation. But from an overall general consensus, consumers have more or have a higher confidence and trust within branded products. Again, with slightly lower on loose food, but much lower at 69% on unbranded packaged products. So when we say unbranded there, it could be that it is a brand, but it could be an unknown brand or a small brand. So not your large known global brands around the world, some global and some even country related well-known brands. But the one with the lower percentage of trust were the ones that didn't have a known or well-recognized brand. When we look at the percentages around the areas that the survey covered, food safety came out at the highest with 55%, but very closely followed by health issues at 53%. So consumers these days are not just interested in the safety of the food, but also the health. And that could be from a nutritional perspective. It could be GMOs. It could be, you know, other additives and concerns these days that, you know, are much more of a concern than in previous generations. In third was environmental issues. That was closely followed by social aspects. And I'll go into more detail on the key highlights on those four areas of the topics. So when we look in a little bit more detail into those four issues, the top ones within health is around product contents being clearly indicated. The second was around food safety, and the third is hygiene and prevention of cross-contamination. And I think, you know, this relates to, you know, a lot of things that are on people's minds these days as a consumer with regard to allergens, you know, some of which can be quite serious, have an effect on the health. And I think the way we try to cover the contents of products is becoming more and more challenging these days, with the drive on reducing packaging and then having so much information that has to be put onto a label with regard to not only legislation requirements, but, you know, other things that are of interest to the customer, or prove challenges for the food industry. On the social aspects, top came food waste. And that's quite an interesting one. Again, a lot around sustainability. But I think, you know, we see so much in the media these days about food waste and how that can be prevented and what we can do to reduce that. And obviously the consumers out there are thinking about that, and it's the top of the agenda. Followed closely with the same percentage on healthy working conditions and human rights. So a lot wider aspect now on social. From an environmental perspective, the top one was sustainability and reduction of plastics. That's really no surprise. You know, we see so much again, not only from the brand owners themselves and their strategy to try and reduce plastic, but the consumers have it at the forefront of their mind also. And then the second one is around organic ingredients and reduction of the use of pesticides. And then followed thirdly by reduction of greenhouse gas emissions. And on other key things that came in under other sustainability issues, again, was on origin of the product and the ingredients. Respect for animal welfare was also high on the agenda, and carbon footprint. So overall, from the results of all of the survey, these are the top reasons under each of the sections of the survey that were at the forefront of the consumer's mind. When we asked the questions around where consumers find their information, the top one came out at labels. Now, QR codes are on there. I'll talk a little bit more about QR codes in a minute, but mostly at the moment, it comes from the text. So a consumer will look at what is written on the product to find out what they want to know. Second is a producer's website, followed by advertising, and then family and friends, and then social media. So surprisingly enough, in this day and age, social media was not at the top where they find information. Majority of consumers still rely on what is written on the product itself. And when we look at the primary source of information, the consumers were more focusing on branded product. So the indication there is they found more that what they needed to know on a branded product than they did on an unbranded product. If we move on to QR codes, so QR codes do have a significant potential to engage consumers. And the results of the survey showed actually in 2020, 46% of consumers have noted or scanned a QR code on a product at least once. And only 19% use QR codes regularly. Now, at the moment, we see that a lot of QR codes are used for more of a marketing reason. So it could be that the QR code shows a recipe for the product, or the QR code may show, a competition, or it's not yet there across industry where the full transparency of the product is being used through this QR code. But when we look at the potential for that, the survey told us that actually much higher percentage, 65%, would use a QR code if it detailed more information on the product origin and authenticity. So I think this is quite a key driver for looking at QR codes and what QR codes can do to give the consumers what they need. I'll move on now to some key insights. So this was a very large survey. So we have people from all around the world here on this call today. So if your country is not mentioned specifically, it's not that there wasn't interesting news, it's just that they were more on the average than the ones that are going to be mentioned. But I'll speak at the end of the presentation on how you can have access to the full survey on a country by country basis. So as I mentioned, when we talk about consumers' trust in brands, the people would welcome more information and transparency at around 65%. And the second one was food safety at 62%, and then around the hygiene practices to prevent contamination. The fourth one, and I think important one as well, was around allergens or potentially dangerous ingredients. And I think, you know, consumers these days are much more aware. We actually see a lot more consumers who do have allergens. We see a lot more consumers who are vegan, who are vegetarian. And I think all these things are contributing to the need for knowledge on the products and what could be dangerous or harmful to consumers these days. When we look at the direct individual impact, among the environmental issues there, sustainability of packaging comes out by far the top. And I don't think that's a surprise for most people. I think when we look at all of the, you know, the initiatives by the large branded and non-branded companies these days in the food industry, they are driving towards a sustainable future. And, you know, reduction in packaging and different types of packaging, including recycled packaging, is where, you know, the focus is. The use of organic ingredients, again, it was in the top 3 of the primary concerns, as well as greenhouse gas. And there was another couple which was around 49, so near 50% was around the restoration of natural habitats and protection of biodiversity. So again, when we look here, you know, we're seeing that consumers are more aware of the environment, the planet, deforestation, and those topics, you know, that maybe, you know, many years ago were never thought of by a consumer. They are much more in the minds of consumers these days, and as high as 50%. So that's quite an interesting insight from the survey. If we look at the top of the mind on health issues, again, transparency on the product content came out first. So consumers generally are not happy with the transparency of the contents and how food safety is secured from the farm to fork. So I think, again, consumers are thinking a lot more down the supply chain now. Where do those ingredients come from? How are those ingredients, you know, secured? And I think, you know, media has helped consumers be more educated on this topic. And of course, we always hear in the media when something bad happens. You know, I mean, you know, we know over the years things have hit the media with regard to, you know, so far down the supply chain, whether it be spices, whether it be commodity ingredients, where there's been some sort of food fraud or, you know, adulteration of those ingredients. And I think through that media and highlight that it has become much more of the conscious mind of the consumer. And then the hygienic practices, again, to prevent contamination. And I think, again, a lot of consumers are more aware of this because we see, you know, daily the amount of product recalls for allergens or potential cross-contamination from allergens. So again, it's not really a surprise that these are at the top of the mind of the consumers. And the environmental standouts, again, is the sustainability in general of packaging. I know we mentioned on the previous slide plastics, but also, you know, even paper and board. Yes, it's recyclable, but the amount of packaging that is put onto a product now is also a concern, you know, for the general consumer. If we look on again, a bit more detail on the social issues. So it was quite interesting that food waste rated higher than workers' rights. I mean, that's not across the board, and this is just a summary of the overall. We will look a little bit more detail in a couple of slides further on about the differences country by country and by age group. But if we just look at it in a general perspective, then food waste is the top, and that is closely followed by 56% on working conditions in fields and factories and on human rights. So there is that conscious mind of the consumer. If we add all of those together, it would probably be the top and above food waste. But as they've been broken down into separate areas, they've come out slightly lower. And this is overall on average. On the other sustainability issues, we did mention already about the origin of the products and ingredients, nearly 64%. And then, interestingly, again now, is respect for animal welfare. I think, again, the consumer's mindset has changed. And I think when we look at the further slides, particularly in the younger generations, and I think also, I think the change in consumers in the form of, you know, the increase in vegetarians and vegans around the world has seen that percentage go up with regard to animal welfare. Because I think across the board, the generations are, you know, making that healthy choice or informed choice on what their diet will be in the future. I think carbon footprint as well is quite high. Again, many consumers these days do make an informed choice whether they buy a locally produced product as opposed to an imported product. And that's also showing in this higher group. And then again, as I mentioned, with regard to dietary preferences, vegan and animal-based ingredients clearly specified. So I think people who are vegan and vegetarian are having their say here around the transparency of the ingredients within the products that they are buying. So is a vegan product truly a vegan product? As we know, a lot of labels put disclaimers on these days because it makes it easier to, when a product is made in a factory where vegan and non-vegan product, for example, can be produced, a lot of brands will put on a disclaimer, and therefore, you know, there's obviously a consensus out there that it needs to be clear. So the top 5 here, there is around the traceability and transparency. So just to go over that, is about food safety, and it's not just the finished product they're interested in, it's about farm to fork, it's about the transparency from the whole of the supply chain that lists within the top 5. And the only other topic making the list in fourth place has figured quite consistently, which is sustainability. And a bit more detail on the primary source of information. So more or less half, 48.8%, mainly it's still the label. It's still the label that consumers will look at. I think QR codes are starting to come in. They're not there yet. The industry is still adopting it. And it may be for certain brands or certain specific products. If I look to the future, I think, the next 10, 15 years, should the expectation be as a consumer that we can scan a code on any product we buy and find out more about the history of that product, then I think, potentially that is the way forward. And, there still is those who will look at the website. And obviously we always turn to family and friends, to see, what they buy or they've traditionally bought over the years. And again, from the first slide, we're nearly 90% on trust of specific brands, but lower, much lower on unbranded food products. And I think this is quite interesting. And is it just because it's an unknown brand? It's around the fact that that brand is not known to them, so therefore always a little bit more nervous about buying those brands. But we see much more of this with some of the lower cost retailers these days, where they're very popular and their brands are becoming very popular, but there still seems to be that less trust. So one of the other questions to capture the value was around asking some questions on independent verification and certification. And a total of 67.5% of the survey total said they would pay more if a product information on quality, safety and environmental, as well as social and health issues, was verified by an independent third party. Okay. Now, interestingly enough, the age group that scored the highest there was the millenniums, so 25 to 39. They were more inclined to pay more, which again was quite interesting because, again, traditionally, if you look at the salary level, maybe of the younger people, then how much spare income do they have to say that they are able or would be willing to pay more for that type of information on the product? But 1 in 2 consumers indicated that they do not know how to check whether a product or a company has been certified or not. And I think that for me has been very interesting because, most of you here on this call today, and certainly myself being in the world of certification for a number of years, we all know, the demands from both retailers, from brand owners about third-party certification and what that involves. But the general consumers, or half of the general consumers, don't know what it is. And I guess it's only when you are in this world, and I speak to my family and my nieces and my nephews about what I do, and they say, oh, that's interesting, because I wouldn't know that that's what this company have to do. And I think there's a huge upside to the food industry companies in better communication of their certification directly with the consumers. And I think that's a very big gap, because I think that communication certainly happens within the supply chain. You certainly want your customer to know I have BRC or I have FSSC certification. I have a social audit. I have an environmental audit. But the consumers aren't getting that information. And that's what's been demonstrated through this survey, which I think is a really interesting point, how we can all improve that, both us as a certification body, working more with consumers, and also from the food industry manufacturing themselves. And the QR code does have a huge potential to engage with consumers. So while just under 46% have noted or scanned a product's QR code, only 18.5% regularly use it. But there does seem to be a tendency of higher regular use where the trust in food safety is lower. And the biggest example we've seen in the survey of that was China. So in China have a very low trust of unbranded products. And I think most of us know where that comes from. You know, they'll trust the big brands of this world. And we know, you know, the scandal a few years back on baby milk. And I think, you know, they trust the branded products. But when it comes to local product, they don't trust. And they, by default, would use a QR code more regularly to give that product assurance if that transparency of the product was there. So that was just one example we pulled out of the survey for China because it stood out so much of the trust and non-trust between branded and non-branded and how regularly they would use QR codes. But then in general, again, we've seen the number increase dramatically if QR codes gave detailed information about the product itself. So I think, again, for the food industry, yes, it's great to do some marketing through a QR code. It's quite novel, you know, say particularly the younger generations, you know, or these days with COVID, we all live by QR codes, I think, in some form or other for scanning where we are. But I think if you were going to get the full traceability and history of a product, the survey told us that then that would increase up to 65%. And that 65% without promoting and informing consumers what they can get from that QR code. And I would expect if this survey was rerun after more of the food industry implemented this, this would be nearer 90%. Because I think it's all about education of the consumers as well and what giving them what they would like to see. Again, a couple of countries are singled out here purely because of the big differences in the results. So I've discussed about the general trust in brands to provide safe food is very high. 95% versus 85% average. But again, from China, the respondents scored non-packaged and unbranded much lower. So again, there was a real difference in China about non-packaged products. And when I'm talking about non-packaged, that could be something that you buy either from a supermarket or from a stall where it would be fresh produce, fresh fruit and vegetables, and that type of product that you may either take your own packaging or you're provided with something to pack that product in. So that was lower of only around 68% compared to the higher 95 and the average of 80, which was quite interesting. And the number who trust unbranded product was as low as 44% in China. If we look at overall in Europe respondents, they tend to trust products they buy are safe, with the exception of Italy, interestingly. They share very similar level of percentages to Chinese consumers, and they have less confidence in unbranded packaged food at 60%, but a higher trust in branded food. And again, this can often be in relation to particular food safety outbreaks that have happened in countries, and we know it has happened in Italy. So there's always some correlation between a food safety or a large product recall or some tragic food safety related occurrence in a country actually can then turn back round into these survey results. And although some of these, very high profile ones have not been recent, it shows that the consumers still have it in their mind. And again, on Europeans, respondents tend to have the trust for food manufacturers and providers more than consumers in other geographies. So by far, Europe had the biggest trust. I had the exception there, obviously, of Italy. And then, so therefore, their results where looking for more product information is much lower. So it seems to be that where there is a higher trust, there is a lower requirement for product information. In Asia, the picture is the reverse. And nearly 61% would welcome more information about food safety, 58.5% on health issues. And then if we looked at particular countries there, China were by far the highest, with Malaysia closely followed. And they are well above the average in those two countries for wanting more information. And that indicates that they actually are taking a greater responsibility to assure the food that they buy is safe. Japan was actually the exception, and it brought the average down because Japan was so low at not needing information at 33%. So the Japanese are very trusting of their products, and that overall lowered the Asia figures. But Malaysia and China were the complete opposite to Japan. Again, looking into the health issues, and again, in general, Asians had a higher degree of concern about product content, would be more welcome. Indonesia, this rises to 77.4. So again, on this particular question on health, Indonesia then comes into those top figures. And Singapore was always also. They were lower slightly. But again, it indicates Asia assume responsibility. So they're not taking for granted. They are actually wanting that responsibility to know more about the products on health issues. And like I've covered on the other slides, both health and food safety issues. And then when we look at the environmental issues, when it comes to wider issues, a few geographies stand out. So interestingly, Vietnam scores well above the average on concern over greenhouse gas emissions at 66.5% versus a 50.6 average. And that is followed by Italy, Brazil, and Spain. So those were the ones that come out as the top, way above the average on a concern on greenhouse gas. And on the reduction of water consumption, it was a concern in general across most European countries, with Germany, Italy, and Spain the highest, but also from Latin America was Brazil. If we look at the age groups on the insights, the general consensus is that younger generations take a broader perspective. So when we look at food safety and health concerns, both what's known as Generation Z and Generation Y would welcome more transparency on environmental issues, respectively. When we look at the, I don't like to say older age group, they're known as boomers, it seems to be less focus and more on issues impacting them as individuals rather than the overall environmental aspect. And I think, that again doesn't come as a surprise to me. I think the environmental impacts and aspects of food production and the food that we eat has been much more part of education with younger generations, and it's been much more part of social media with younger generations. So those results for me are not a surprise. It's not to say the older generation are not concerned about it. I think it's just that there's a more conscious thought process with the younger generation when they are buying products. And if we look at the concerns over social issues, Southeast Asia and countries in South Europe pay higher attention to social issues. So things like living wages, working hours, or working conditions score higher in countries such as Malaysia, Vietnam, and Indonesia. And again, this could be an indication that those countries know there is a known issue with some of those social issues within those countries. And I'm not saying that isn't known throughout the world. And I think, that is very much known when buying products from some countries. And that's why the industry in general and the food manufacturing industry are very strong in driving, social aspects, for the generations to come. And we're certainly seeing a step change in improvements in that area. In Europe, concerns over human rights are on the rise. And this has been due to recent scandals. So again, it always gets into the media when a brand or, a supplier related to a brand ends up in the media with regard to either mistreating of employees, anything human rights related. And that could be child labour, it could be forced labour. It's particularly rife in the agricultural sector. And that's why I guess this concern is in as well as in Southeast Asia, in South Europe, because they're very high agricultural countries. And we have seen that, there has been media reports of issues of concern in some of these. So it isn't just it's not just a concern for developing countries. It's a concern in very well established European countries as well. So when we look at animal welfare, European countries like Italy, United Kingdom, and Germany are in the top of the average list of being concerned about animal welfare. And elsewhere, the primary focus has been on origin and ingredients rather than animal welfare, particularly prominent in Italy and in parts of Asia, where product origin and ingredients are the main concerns again. Italians are very high on origin, and I guess that's because there's a lot of locally produced product in Italy. And, we do know there's been cases of fake product with a fake origin. And I guess that comes again to the consumer's minds when they're looking at that information with regards to that. And again, welcoming more information. The Japan and Singapore are lowering the average slightly from Indonesia, Malaysia, and China. And again, when we talk about the generation Z and Y, they are more willing to pay for having extra information on those products and recognizing, the quality or the food safety of those standards. Quite high scores, nearly 79% of Generation Y and just 75.5%, compared to an average of 67%. And as you can see, the boomers see this differently, with only 56%. So it is quite a lot lower for the boomer generation with regard to paying more for products with being able to verify the information. And then the interesting one for me is about checking for third-party assurance. So in Italy, more than 80% versus the average of 67.5% would pay extra for products if that information was there. In Asia, it's around 78%. And countries where food safety is of higher concern, that then relates to the paying or checking for third-party certification. So apart from Italy, it's a sharp contrast to Europe, where most consumers in Europe don't feel the need for that, with the exception for Italy. And again, the communication of that through the product can bridge the trust gap. And I think, we already know on how many are using QR codes. It doesn't surprise me with the high technology of China that they are the highest by far who would use QR codes. I think the rest is, the number rises dramatically at the prospect of QR codes providing the right information. And I think that's where we need to get to, because if you look at these figures here in Vietnam, Indonesia, they're well into the 80-90%, who would use it if it was available with the right information. I mean, this is just an example of how this can be done. And there's technology out there through blockchain that can actually digitalize that recording of the information throughout, starting with the farmer. Where did which farm did the product come from, or the ingredient come from? Where was it traded, if it goes through a trader or a broker? Where is it processed? So the processing plant information. Then on to final product processing, and finally ending with a QR code on the product. And that QR code on the product, in this case with DMV, is called My Story. It can record all that information along the chain, including the carbon footprint, including the social aspects, including, a digital copy of the food safety certificate. So it is possible. I think it's still relatively new. It's relatively growing, but I think it's the future. And I think it's what the future generations will want to see in our complete transparency of the supply chain. So I hope I'm on time. If you would like any further information, because this has just been a snapshot of some of the key highlights, Simon will provide this information, but you can go onto the link on our website and there is lots of information. There is PDF download, or you can even go into the detailed or interactive highlights. You can even select your individual country and just look at the differences in your country, or compare it with a region, compare it with an age group. So feel free to go and gather some more information. And of course, if anybody has any questions or further would like some more information from myself, please feel free to ask. And I hope you have enjoyed the presentation. Thank you.
Great. Thanks very much, Joy. Let me just, can you switch your webcam back on, Joy? I'll stop the slides. There we go. Thanks very much, Joy, for that. We do have some questions. So first one from Shiva. Will the significance of QR codes vary based on the income group of consumers and the status of economic development of country as a whole?
I mean, when we look at the investment in the QR code, it comes from the manufacturing company. So the cost of it should really not be passed on to the consumer. It should be the consumer's right to be able to have that transparency. Now, whether that would end up being a slightly higher cost, as I discussed in the presentation, the younger generations seem not so worried about a small, if there was a slight increase, if they got that transparency on the product from the survey results, obviously. But then, yes, I think the overall economic constraints within an individual country, could be considered at different times. People may be prepared to pay more. I think it's got to come from industry. It's got to be done at a cost-effective way to the consumer. And I think, brands have to recognise that it's also, in a way, as well as being totally transparent and allowing that, that from their marketing perspective, it's a differentiator in the marketplace. So in a way, for me, it's an investment from the food industry also. Yeah.
And I mean, with technology, smartphones, almost everybody.
Exactly. Yeah.
One. Yeah. Okay. Mithon. What about food preferences, if any, for locally grown food, trends across different countries? Did you mention anything about that?
Actually, that wasn't part of this survey. I mean, we do this survey every year, and that's quite interesting. So good question. I mean, I think if I just look at it from general consensus on carbon footprint, I would say yes, the drive and the way consumers are going is definitely that thinking into locally grown product, not just for the fact of jobs, economy in the country by having that, but also from the environmental perspective. So yes, I see the trend definitely going that way, although it wasn't specifically covered in this survey. It come more general under the carbon footprint.
Yep, sure. Thanks. Just some nice comments there from Mir. Yes, we've enjoyed the entire presentation. It's awesome. So there you go. Neil. Do you have a good example of a QR code use on a consumer product?
Did you not watch the introduction videos, the advertisements? So on there was DMV of one that we do on wine in Italy. So we're doing quite a lot now. And when you say on consumer product, you would probably say a bottle of authentic origin Italian wine isn't your normal consumer product in general. But I think at the moment, some of the reasons these brands want to do it is because they want to show the authenticity of where the grapes are coming from, of the social aspect of the farming elements. So again, it was a very short video at the beginning of this call, but if you go onto our website, there is some examples on there. And I think obviously there is some examples from some brands out there who are doing it on specific products. So you can either go and look at something specifically that DMV are doing, or I think, you can just generally go out, but, it's not so common completely yet, but it's starting to come on some products.
Yeah, the use cases of it are just endless, really. The creativity, like for example, scanning a product takes you through to a website or a video, that shows you how it's made or something. Or some companies are using it for like promotions that take you, if you scan the QR code, it takes you to a site and tells you whether you've won something, so it builds brands. So there's all sorts of things.
Yeah, I mean, if we take one industry in particular that is always the questionable one is fisheries and fish products. And, that technology now, you can scan a can of tuna and you can see the geography of where it was caught, where it was actually caught, where it was landed, where it was processed, where it came through the supply chain. So when you go into a supermarket and, people make product claims these days, whether it's line caught or it's, it's farmed, people make that choice. So you want to be sure that that's right. And I'm not saying any brands out there, don't tell the truth when they claim it's line caught, but I think it's a way that these brands can actually say, not only are we stating this, here, we can show you.
Yeah, and they can differentiate themselves from competition who are perhaps not doing that. And then consumers who are interested might buy their product.
Exactly, yeah.
Rohit, how nutritional value makes an impact for RTE Foods?
Can I just check? Are you talking about ready to eat, I guess?
I think so, ready to eat, yeah.
Okay. Sometimes acronyms mean different things.
Yeah, I think so.
Okay. I think it makes a lot. And I think, we've been talking a lot lately about, nutritional foods and these hidden fats and hidden processed foods and, highly processed foods. And we've seen a lot around that. And at the moment, those highly processed foods, it's not clear on the labeling. And until, that comes into more from a legislation perspective, but again, it's something that needs to be clearer. The nutritional infant, because they're often hidden. The labels meet legislation, but those highly processed foods, it doesn't stand out. You can't scan that label and have it flash at you to say this contains high processed foods. It doesn't do it. And the average consumer may look through all them ingredients and be a little bit baffled because on the face value, it looks a very healthy product. But if there was a way that it could be more transparent, then it's more of an informed choice. So I think it will have an impact in the future for sure. Yeah.
Neil, do you foresee regulators mandating any of these changes?
Interesting one, Neil. Yes, I think they're starting to. I think in terms of traceability, I'm not saying that regulators will ever get to the point where they say you must put a QR code on your product. But I think more and more now we're seeing in the US, in Russia, just more lately in Germany as well, where the legislation around transparency and traceability is being made much clearer. How far the regulators will go, I think they will move on nutritional. I think they'll have to. We've seen it move in the UK on sugary products and high tax on sugary foods. So I think it will change. How quickly in each individual country, I think will depend. Yeah. But, the legislation, in a way, the brands aren't going to make the change. They should be making the changes now based on things like this, based on a consumer survey, or not just this one, but the many out there about what consumers want before the legislation comes in.
Yep, sure. Insure, how can awareness be created for widespread usage of QR codes? How can the consumers be assured that the information provided is authentic?
I mean, that's a very good question because, I think from the technologies that not only DMV, but, other organizations out there, that blockchain technology is very secure. And part of what we do is assure that as well. So our business is assurance. the digital part of it is there, but what we're doing is ensuring the authenticity of what's there. And yes, I think consumers need to be educated more on what that means. You know, I suppose if you think of it about what a general consumer would think about is how secure is their data on their mobile phone, for example. How can we turn that into something that is readily available to consumers, to be able to assure them that what they're seeing is authentic? And yes, it's a challenge. I think in general, you know, education to consumers, it needs to be improved. And I think both, you know, food manufacturing and organisations like ours, you know, are the ones that, you know, need to work harder to get that through on a consumer level.
Okay, thanks. Moketse, how soon do you see QR scan codes being used as encoded certification for product information, as in data bar codes, which provide batch number, expiration dates, and further quality claims? Okay,
so it's happening now. You know, I did mention to you the advert at the beginning on the example that we've given on the wine. So that gives the authenticity through from the farm, the vineyard. Can't call a winery a farm, can I? Especially to the Italians. So with the vineyard, the grape, the process, and then at the end, it gives all of the information about the production. And then at the end, you can click on their certificate and it shows their certificate, both for the farming level global gap and then for their manufacturing. I can't remember now whether it's BRC IFS or what one of the third party, and it actually then shows through that. So it's already there. It's already there.
Yeah. It's already there. And well, a question from Mia: what's the future of QR codes? As we was talking, the uses are endless. The creativity.
Yeah.
Okay, Mohan, training was absolutely superb and the content was extremely informative and incredibly useful. Right, I think we've got through the questions, so brilliant. Yeah, that was great, that Joy. So how was it then, your first webinar? Okay, with us?
Yes, surprisingly the Wi-Fi's been fine and the technology's worked well, so for a Friday afternoon, that's great news.
Super. So we can all enjoy our weekend. And just before you go, sorry to everybody who's not, but we are English. And so we're in the Euro finals. Score prediction for weekend for tomorrow, Sunday, against Italy. Are you going to give us a score prediction against Italy?
If there's any Italians on, I wish you luck.
Yeah. Okay, I'm going to say England are going to win on penalties anyway.
Oh no, please! I can't stand penalties.
It probably will end up that, but let's hope we're on the right side for once. Right, Joy, thanks very much for your time today. Have a great weekend, and hope to see you on another one of these webinars soon. Okay.
You're welcome. Thank you very much for inviting me.
Thanks, Joy. Right, ladies and gents, I've put your certificate in the sidebar. So, oh, Ryan, don't say that. 2-0 Italians win. Shiva, England win on penalties, 4-3. Oh, I like that one. So, okay, so Shiva, I've said England, Ryan, Italian, whoever says England or Italian, the next person, that's where it's going to be. And we've called it first here on Food Safety Fridays. Right, I've put your certificate in the sidebar. We'll follow up with an email shortly with the recording, the slides, and the certificate, and also a link to that survey on the DNV website. So everything there for you. Thanks for your attendance today. Thanks for joining in and engaging with the webinar. It does make a difference when you ask questions, etc. And see you on the next one. Take care, everyone. Bye.